I was supposed to be having the time of my life. A luxury cruise across the Mediterranean. Everything about it screamed paradise. I'd saved for months, and when the opportunity arose, I didn't hesitate. I invited my best friend, Alex, to join me. After all, who wouldn't want to indulge in the lavish life of a cruise ship, drifting through the open sea with not a care in the world? From the moment we boarded, everything felt perfect. The ship was massive, gleaming under the sun. It was the newest in the fleet, so pristine that it almost didn't feel real. The crew greeted us with smiles, and the passengers were a mix of excited tourists, each one eager to begin their vacation. But as I took in the beauty of the ship, I couldn't shake a strange feeling, a sensation that I couldn't quite place, like something was wrong but buried deep within the ship's hull, hidden beneath the layers of polished luxury. Alex dismissed my unease, calling it pre-vacation jitters, and we moved on, enjoying the extravagant meals and endless entertainment. The first few days were heaven. Days spent lounging by the pool, nights dancing in grand ballrooms, and afternoons sipping cocktails on the deck as the sun dipped below the horizon. But as we sailed further away from land, deeper into the open sea, the atmosphere began to shift. The staff, always impeccably dressed, always smiling, seemed oddly distant, not in a rude way, but in a detached manner, as though they were simply going through the motions, without any true connection to their duties. At first, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. After all, we were on a cruise. What could possibly go wrong? It wasn't until the third night that things began to unravel. It was a stormy evening, the kind of night where the wind howled outside and the waves tossed the ship from side to side. I had just finished a late dinner with Alex when the lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness for a few seconds. When the lights returned, everything felt slightly off. There was a hush over the entire ship, a quiet tension that hadn't been there before. The passengers seemed to retreat into their cabins, the once lively atmosphere now replaced with a tense quiet. Alex and I headed back to our cabin, trying to shrug off the strange feeling that had taken hold of us. As we passed through the long hallways, I noticed something unsettling. The crew was missing. It was unusual. The ship was always bustling with staff, and yet, there wasn't a soul in sight. Even the cleaning carts had been abandoned midway down the hall. "Where is everyone?" I asked Alex, my voice barely a whisper. Alex shrugged, not as disturbed as I was. "Probably hiding from the storm. It's a bit intense tonight." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Once back in our cabin, I locked the door behind us and drew the curtains shut. The storm outside raged on, the sound of the wind pressing against the windows. I sat down on the edge of the bed, trying to ignore the unease in my gut. I was just about to lie down when I heard it, a soft tapping like fingernails against wood, coming from the hallway. I froze. Alex didn't hear it, or at least didn't seem to care. He was on his phone, scrolling through something, but I couldn't focus. The tapping continued, growing louder, more insistent. I grabbed the keycard, my hand shaking as I approached the door. Before I could even open it, the tapping stopped. I stood there for a few moments, heart pounding, trying to calm my nerves. I opened the door a crack, peering into the hallway, but there was no one in sight. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. "Are you okay?" Alex asked from behind me. I nodded, but my instincts screamed at me to leave the hallway. I slammed the door shut and locked it once more. The storm outside intensified, and we both retreated to bed. But sleep didn't come easily. The tapping had unnerved me, but worse was the gnawing feeling that something was lurking in the shadows of the ship, something waiting for us. I eventually drifted off to sleep, only to be woken in the middle of the night. The lights in the cabin flickered once again, and I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing down the hallway. But this time, it wasn't just a faint noise. It was heavy, like someone was walking right outside our door. My heart stopped. I didn't dare move, not even to breathe. I could feel Alex beside me, frozen, his hand gripping mine tightly. The footsteps stopped right in front of the door. And then, a voice, low, guttural, whispered through the crack beneath the door. "Come out. To play. I recoiled, my body frozen in fear. Alex and I just stared at each other, wide-eyed. The voice continued, murmuring unintelligible words. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but nothing made sense. I had to do something. Slowly, I reached for the phone beside the bed, but before I could dial, the voice stopped, replaced by a loud bang on the door. So sudden, so forceful, it shook the entire cabin. We both jumped, and Alex let out a strangled cry. In that instant, everything inside me screamed to leave, but where could we go? The hallway was pitch black, and I knew I couldn't trust anyone on this ship. Not after everything I had seen. The crew, the missing passengers, the strange whispers. It all pointed to something dark, something evil lurking beneath the surface of this beautiful ship. Suddenly, the banging stopped. For a moment, I thought it was over. I felt the weight in my chest lessen, but then the door swung open on its own, the lock clicking away like some unseen force had undone it. I gasped. In the doorway stood a figure, tall and gaunt, draped in black. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but I could feel its eyes burning into me. And then it stepped inside, not walking, but gliding. Alex screamed and bolted for the window, but before he could reach it, the figure raised a skeletal hand, and the window slammed shut with a deafening crash. We were trapped. You shouldn't have come, the figure said in a voice that made my skin crawl. Panic surged through me. What are you? What do you want? The figure tilted its head, and its hood fell back, revealing a face that was no longer human. Its skin was pale, stretched tight over bone, and its eyes, they were empty black voids. I couldn't tear my gaze away. We are the forgotten, it whispered, the souls of the lost. I felt my legs weaken, my body sinking into the floor. The lost, I gasped. The figure nodded. This ship, this is where we all come to die. Suddenly, the walls around us seemed to close in. The cabin shrank, and the air grew thick, suffocating. The lights flickered out completely, leaving us in utter darkness. The figure stepped closer, and I could hear its breath. Raspy, wet, as though it didn't breathe like us at all. Welcome to your last voyage, it said, and then the darkness swallowed everything. I woke up on the cold, wet deck of the ship, alone. The ship was empty now. No passengers, no crew, just me, stranded in the middle of an endless sea, with no land in sight. I don't know if I'm dreaming or dead, but I know one thing for certain. This ship will never return to port, and I will never leave. The silent abyss. I had always dreamed of cruising the open seas. The idea of being surrounded by nothing but endless water, with the warm sun overhead and the sound of waves crashing against the hull, seemed like the perfect escape. So, when my friend Emily invited me on a luxury cruise, I didn't hesitate for a second. We were to sail across the Caribbean, spending a week in paradise, enjoying the lavish amenities, and leaving the worries of everyday life behind. The ship was massive, a floating city in the middle of the ocean. As we boarded, I was in awe of its grandeur. Gleaming floors, chandeliers hanging from the ceilings, and everything seemingly in perfect order. But something felt off. I couldn't quite place it, but the atmosphere on board was strange, as if there was an invisible weight in the air. Emily noticed it too, but brushed it off as the usual first-day excitement. After all, what could go wrong on a luxury cruise, right? The first few days were pure bliss. We spent our time lounging by the pool, indulging in extravagant meals, and taking in breathtaking views from the deck. But as we ventured deeper into the open ocean, I began to notice the little things. The odd creaks and groans coming from the ship's structure, the strange flickering of the lights at night, and the unsettling silence in certain parts of the vessel, especially near the lower decks. The crew seemed normal, friendly even, but there was something about their eyes, a kind of emptiness, as if they were just going through the motions, disconnected from everything around them. It was easy to ignore at first, but as the days passed, I started to feel like I was being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling, and it became harder to sleep at night, my mind constantly racing with thoughts of what could be lurking in the shadows of this massive ship. One night, Emily and I decided to go to one of the late-night parties in one of the grand ballrooms. It was a masquerade, and everyone was dressed in extravagant outfits, laughing, dancing, and drinking. It was everything a cruise should be, until I noticed something strange. The faces of the guests seemed almost too perfect, too serene. I found myself growing uneasy in the crowd, like I was trapped in a dream that I couldn't wake up from. As the night wore on, I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to get some air. I excused myself from Emily and made my way to the upper deck, hoping the cool breeze would calm my nerves. The deck was eerily quiet, with only the faint hum of the ship's engines in the background. I leaned over the railing, gazing out at the endless expanse of water, trying to shake off the lingering dread. That's when I heard it. A soft whisper, almost like a breath against my ear. I spun around, heart racing, but there was no one there. The deck was empty. A cold chill ran down my spine, but I convinced myself it was just the wind, maybe the sound of the ship settling into the water. Yet, deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I decided to head back inside, but as I made my way toward the staircase leading down to the lower decks, I caught sight of a figure moving in the shadows. At first, I thought it was a crew member, but there was something off about the way they moved, too fluid, too deliberate. I hesitated, my feet frozen to the ground. The figure glanced back at me, their face obscured by the shadows. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely a whisper. The figure didn't respond. They simply continued walking, disappearing around the corner, as if they had no intention of acknowledging me. I felt a strange pull to follow, but something inside me screamed not to. I turned and hurried down the stairs, but as I reached the first deck, I saw the figure again. This time standing at the end of the corridor, staring at me. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The figure didn't move, didn't even blink. They just stood there, an eerie silence hanging between us. "Why are you following me?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure's head tilted slightly, as if considering my question. Then, without a word, they turned and disappeared into a nearby hallway. I wanted to scream, but the words caught in my throat. My mind raced with fear and confusion, and I instinctively ran toward the nearest exit, desperate to find Emily. When I reached our cabin, Emily was sitting on the bed, looking out the window with an odd expression on her face. She didn't seem to notice my frantic entrance. Her eyes were vacant, glazed over, as though she were in a trance. "Emily?" I called out, my voice shaking. She blinked, as if snapping out of a daze. "Oh hey, you okay?" I didn't know how to answer. How could I explain what I had seen? The figure, the feeling of being watched, it didn't make sense. Emily didn't seem to notice anything strange about the ship, about the people, or about anything at all. She was just there. We went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the ship, every whisper of the wind felt like a warning, like something was waiting for me in the darkness. I finally drifted into a restless sleep, only to be woken by a loud banging at the door. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. "Open up! Open up now!" A voice shouted from the other side. I glanced at Emily, but she was still asleep, oblivious to the commotion. I hesitated before slowly approaching the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. "Who is it?" I called out. There was no response, just the persistent banging. Something inside me told me not to open it, not to engage with whatever or whoever was on the other side. But the banging grew louder, more frantic, until it felt like the door was going to burst open. I backed away, fear clawing at my chest. Then the door suddenly fell silent. A chill filled the room, and I could feel my breath freezing in my throat. Slowly, I turned to the window, half expecting to see the figure outside, staring in at me. But there was nothing, just the vast, empty ocean. The next morning, everything seemed normal, too normal. The crew went about their duties as if nothing had happened. Emily was as cheerful as ever, brushing off my concerns with a laugh. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The passengers were too quiet, too complacent. The crew members, when they looked at me, had that same empty expression I had seen the night before. Later that day, the captain announced that we were about to hit a strange patch of ocean. Unexplained, unknown. The ship would take a detour, but it would be a brief one. There was no need to worry, he assured us, his voice almost too calm. But I couldn't stop worrying. Every night, the whispers grew louder, the shadows more pronounced. And then, one fateful night, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside our door. I knew it was them, the figure, the whispers. They had come for me. I didn't open the door this time. Instead, I grabbed Emily and dragged her out of bed, telling her we had to leave, we had to get off the ship. But when we tried to reach the exit, we found ourselves trapped. Every hallway led us in circles, every door locked behind us. There was no escape. And then, I saw it, the figure again, standing at the end of the hallway. This time, they weren't alone. Dozens of them, their faces twisted and hollow, began to emerge from the shadows. Their eyes met mine, and I realized with a sickening jolt that they were all the same person. They had been following us all along, waiting, patient. Lost at sea. I should have never stepped onto this ship. The Oceanus Eclipse was supposed to be a luxury cruise, 7 days of relaxation, free-flowing cocktails, and a much-needed break from the chaos of my life. But now, as I sit in my cabin, door bolted shut, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps, I realize I won't be making it to the final destination. Something is terribly wrong on this ship. It started subtly. A wrong turn here, a misplaced shadow there. Small things that, at first, I brushed off as exhaustion or paranoia. But now I know better. This ship isn't taking us where we think it is. Day 1 embarkation. The first day went smoothly. I boarded the ship with a mix of excitement and unease. There was something off about the crew. Their smiles were too stiff, their eyes too vacant, like they were acting out a role rather than simply doing their jobs. I chalked it up to nerves. Maybe they were just tired. The Oceanus Eclipse was massive, with towering decks, endless corridors, and a maze-like layout that felt deliberately confusing. My cabin was on the lower deck, windowless, but comfortable enough. That night, I heard the first sound, a deep, resonant groan, like metal under pressure. It came from somewhere deep below, beneath the floors, vibrating through the walls. It was loud enough to jolt me awake, my heart hammering. The ship was old, I told myself, just the engines. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was moving beneath me. Day 2, the missing passenger. The next morning, the ship was buzzing with hushed conversations. A woman had gone missing. She was there at dinner. A man at my breakfast table muttered, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. Then she just vanished. Crew members dismissed it as an accident. Maybe she had too much to drink and fallen overboard. These things happened, but there was something cold in the way they explained it. No concern, no urgency, just mechanical reassurance. I tried to shake it off, but unease curled around me like a shadow. That night, I got lost. I had been wandering the ship, trying to clear my head, when I found myself in a part of the vessel that didn't match any of the maps. The halls were narrower, the walls damp, the lights flickering weakly. Then I saw it. A door. Not like the others, this one was old, rusted, bolted shut with heavy chains. My skin prickled as I stared at it, my instincts screaming for me to turn back. But before I could move, I heard breathing. Low, wet, ragged, coming from behind the door. I ran. Day 3, the deck with no end. By the third day, more people were missing. No announcements, no explanations, just empty chairs at breakfast, silent staterooms. I went to the main deck for air, trying to shake the ever-growing sense of dread. The sea stretched endlessly in all directions, black as ink beneath an overcast sky. Then I noticed something strange. No birds, no land, not even the faintest sign of another vessel. We were alone. I walked the perimeter of the ship, trying to shake the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. That's when I found the deck. It wasn't on the ship's map. A long stretch of metal railings and wooden planks leading into darkness. The further I walked, the more distorted the ship became behind me. The lights dimmed. The ocean disappeared into an unnatural void. And then I heard the footsteps. Behind me, soft, measured. I spun around. No one. But the air changed. It grew thick, heavy with the scent of rotting saltwater. I ran back the way I came, but the deck stretched on endlessly. No matter how fast I moved, I wasn't getting any closer to the entrance. And then I saw them, figures emerging from the dark. Their faces twisted in grotesque, unnatural smiles. Their eyes hollow. They didn't move at first, just watched. Then, in unison, they took a step forward. I screamed. Suddenly, I was back in the main part of the ship. The deck had vanished behind me. A crew member appeared at my side, his grip firm on my arm. "You shouldn't go there," he said. His expression was blank, his fingers too cold. Day 4, the ship with no end. By day 4, I stopped seeing anyone at all. The dining hall was empty, the hallways silent. The ship, massive as it was, felt like a ghost town. That night, I locked my door, barricaded it with a chair. But at exactly 3:17 a.m., the knocking started. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I held my breath. Another 3 knocks. Then the handle turned. I watched, paralyzed, as the lock clicked open. The door swung inward. The lights flickered, and something stood in the doorway. It wasn't human. It was tall, its skin stretched impossibly tight, its limbs too long. Its face was a blur, shifting, changing, and then smiled. I don't remember what happened next. I woke up in my bed, drenched in sweat. My door was still locked, but the chair had been moved. Day 5, adrift in the void. The ship is no longer moving. I don't know how I know this, but I feel it. We are adrift, floating in an ocean that isn't right. The sky has turned a deep, unnatural black. No stars, no horizon, just an endless abyss stretching beyond the deck. The ship isn't taking us anywhere anymore. It's keeping us. Day 6, I am not alone. I woke up to whispers, soft, hissing voices slithering through the walls. I pressed my ear against the metal, and my blood ran cold. They were calling my name. I didn't dare leave my room, but the walls, they're breathing. Day 7, the last night. I don't know if I'll survive the night. The knocking has started again, louder this time. The door handle is turning. The whispers are inside the room now. I think I finally understand. This ship, it never had a destination. It was never meant to return. It just collects souls. And tonight, it's coming for mine. Adrift in the abyss. I never should have taken this trip. The cruise was meant to be a fresh start, a way to clear my head after a bad breakup, a week at sea, alone with my thoughts, free from the weight of my past. Sounded perfect. But now, as I sit here in my dimly lit cabin, staring at the locked door, listening to the slow, deliberate scratching on the other side, I know I made a terrible mistake. It started on the second night. The first day had been uneventful. Sunbathing on the deck, overpriced cocktails, making small talk with strangers I'd never see again. That evening, I decided to explore. The ship was enormous, a floating city with bars, theaters, and endless corridors that all looked the same. At some point, I must have taken a wrong turn because I ended up in a part of the ship that was different. The lighting was dimmer, the air thick with an old, musty scent. The carpet was damp beneath my shoes. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, lined with doors that looked older than the rest of the ship, with tarnished brass numbers and keyholes instead of modern card readers. I turned to head back, but something stopped me. A door at the far end was slightly ajar, revealing only darkness beyond. I felt an odd compulsion to step closer. The closer I got, the heavier the air became. My breath came short, and my pulse pounded in my ears. Then, from inside the room, I heard it, a whisper. Not words, not exactly, just a breathy, rasping sound, like something struggling to form syllables. I bolted. I ran through the corridors until I found myself back in familiar territory. my heart hammering. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe I just wandered into an old section of the ship, a part not meant for guests. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that darkened room, felt the weight of unseen eyes watching me. And then came the knocking. At first, I thought I was dreaming. A slow, rhythmic knock on my cabin door. 3 taps. Pause. 3 more. My breath caught in my throat. I checked the time, 3:17 a.m. I told myself it was just some drunk passenger messing around. I stayed silent, waiting for it to stop. But it didn't. It just kept going. Knock, knock, knock. I gathered my courage and crept toward the door. Hello, I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. Silence. I waited, heart pounding. Then, just as I reached for the handle, knock, knock, knock. Louder, more insistent. I staggered back. Who's there? Nothing. I checked the peephole, but the hallway was empty. No footsteps, no shadows, just that same eerie silence pressing in from all sides. Sleep was out of the question after that. The next morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it, but paranoia clung to me like a second skin. I avoided my room, wandering the ship aimlessly. Every corridor felt longer, the walls closer, the other passengers off. Something was wrong with them. At dinner, I sat at a table with 3 other guests, a couple and an older man, all of whom I had seen before but never spoken to. They smiled too much, their teeth too white, their eyes too wide. They chewed their food slowly, deliberately, never blinking. And then, all at once, they turned to stare at me. "How was your night?" the woman asked, her voice dripping with something unnatural. I hesitated. "Fine." Her smile widened. "Did you sleep well?" I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. I excused myself and left, their eyes following me all the way out of the dining hall. By the 4th night, I knew I had to leave that ship. Something was hunting me. The knocking returned at exactly 3:17 a.m. This time it was louder, more desperate. I cowered in my bed, gripping the sheets like they were the only thing tethering me to reality. Then I heard something new, the handle turning. I shot up, staring at the door as it trembled, something testing the lock from the other side. I wanted to scream, but my throat closed. And then, a whisper, right outside my door. My name. I scrambled out of bed, heart slamming against my ribs. I wasn't waiting to see what was on the other side. I ran. I don't even remember leaving my room. I just remember sprinting through the endless corridors, twisting, turning, finding myself in that same dark hallway from before, the one with the old doors. And then I saw it, the door at the end, still open. But this time something stood inside. A figure, tall, thin, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an impossible angle. Eyes, black voids staring right at me. It didn't move. It just watched. Then it whispered my name again. I turned and ran, hearing footsteps behind me, impossibly fast. I didn't stop until I reached the main deck, gasping for air, nearly colliding with a crew member. There's something down there, I choked out. The man stared at me, his face unreadable. Then he sighed. "You shouldn't have gone down there." He didn't ask where I'd been. He didn't seem surprised. He just led me back to my room, locking the door behind me. That was last night. Now, as I sit here, the knocking has started again. Louder, more insistent. The door is rattling. I don't think the lock will hold. I don't think I'll make it off this ship.